that person can't be brought into the conversation doesn't nullify physics as a domain of right and wrong answers. And yet, on the subject of morality, we seem to think that the possibility of differing opinions, the fact that someone can come forward and say, well, no, my morality has nothing to do with human flourishing, it has to do with following, Sharia law, the fact that that position can be articulated, I hear people like Jonathan and certainly many philosophers saying, well, that proves in some sense that there's no there. This is all made up. This is not, we can't, the fact that you can articulate a different position is a problem for the whole field. And I think it's not. So I think we have, obviously we have an intuitive physics, and much of our intuitive physics is wrong with respect to the goal of understanding how matter and energy are going to behave in the universe. What I want to say is that most people, most of us, most cultures have an intuitive morality. And much of our intuitive morality may be wrong with respect to the goal of maximizing human flourishing. Maximizing the well-being of conscious creatures generally. And so what I'm going to argue to you briefly is that the only sphere of legitimate moral concern, really, when you get into the details, is the well-being of conscious creatures. I'll say a few words in defense of that assertion, but I think actually that our sense that that has to be defended is the product of some fallacious moves and double standards that we're not noticing. And I don't know that I have the time to expose all of those, but I've introduced two things. I've introduced the concept of consciousness and the concept of well-being. So briefly, consciousness is the only context in which we can talk about value and morality and right and wrong and good and evil. Why is that not an arbitrary starting point? Well, what's the alternative? I mean, just imagine someone coming forward and saying, actually, I have this other source of value which has nothing to do with the actual or potential experience of conscious beings. This is something that cannot affect the experience of anything in this life or in any future life. Well, I mean, if you put that thing in a box, what I think you have in that box is, by definition, the least interesting thing in the universe. I mean, it's something by definition we cannot care about. Anything else that is going to be a source of value is going to have some relationship to the experience of conscious beings. So I don't think consciousness is an arbitrary starting point. I mean, when we're talking about morality, when we're talking about right and wrong, and good and evil, and outcomes that matter, we are talking about changes in consciousness. And so I would add to that well-being captures everything we could care about in the moral sphere. And then the task is to have a definition of well-being that is truly open-ended and can absorb everything we care about. So, and this is why I don't call myself a consequentialist or a utilitarian, because traditionally consequentialists have bounded the notion of consequences in such a way as to make it seem a brittle and kind of body count exercise that only Aspergerian people could adopt. I mean, you take the trolley problem. If there is just in fact a difference between pushing someone and flipping a switch, say, in terms of the actual emotional consequences in people, well, then that has to be brought into account. You take Peter Singer's shallow pond problem. We all know that it would take a different kind of person to walk past a child drowning in a shallow pond and say, I don't want to get my suit wet, than it takes to not open the appeal from UNICEF. I mean, it says much more about you to walk past that shallow pond. And if we were all those sorts of people, there would be consequential ramifications as far as the eye can see. So it seems to me that the challenge is to really get clear about what consequences are and what changes in human experience are possible and what changes matter. And in thinking about this and thinking about a universal framework for well-being claims and for morality claims, I'm now thinking in terms of what I call a moral landscape, which I would suspect there's a place in hell for people who would repurpose a cliche in this way, but the phrase a moral landscape actually captures what I'm after, because I'm imagining a space of peaks and valleys where the heights correspond to the heights of flourishing possible for any conscious system, and the valleys refer to the deepest depths of misery. And changes in, I mean, to speak specifically of human beings for the moment, any change that can affect the change in human consciousness would lead to a translation in that space. And so changes to our genome, changes to economic systems, and anything in between that can affect human well-being, for good or for ill, would translate into movements in this hypothetical space of possible human experience. And a few things drop out of this model. One is that it's possible that there are many peaks on the moral landscape, just to speak specifically of human communities. Perhaps there is a way to maximize human flourishing in which we really follow Peter Singer as far as we can go and somehow train ourselves to be truly dispassionate to friends and family and just globally compassionate and globally concerned, and not weight our children's welfare more than someone else's children's welfare. And perhaps there's another peak where we're biased, as we tend to be, toward our own children within certain limits, and correcting for that bias by creating a social system which is in fact fair. And so there could be 1,000 ways to tune the variable of selfishness versus altruism to land us on a peak on this landscape. But there will be many more ways to not be on a